Hello, everybody, and welcome to this lesson. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the introductory concepts in AP Human Geography. So, something really important is map making, and to know that all maps are incorrect in some way. So, the issue is that you're taking a three-dimensional object and you're putting a flat map, a two-dimensional object on it. So if you think about if I was holding an orange and I was peeling it off and then I laid it flat, it's not going to be this perfectly, flat rectangle. So different types of projections are going to have different strengths and weaknesses. So the Mercator cylindrical projection, you can remember it's like a cylinder, the paper's wrapped around the globe. So this is going to usually be presented as like a square, distorts area of land masses relative to each other. So you can see, because this was open down here, we have huge Antarctica and, small Africa. So that's not quite right. But this was used like for sea navigation and things like that. And you can usually identify it because you can see that it's square. And just remember, it was wrapped around like a cylinder. The Robinson projection is going to be, remember, Robinson, a little bit more rounded when it's presented. And this is the one that is the most well-rounded. So it minimizes errors in most areas. Very popular. Now I'm just going to go through this pretty quick, but latitude and longitude are important in AP Human Geography. They make up the global grid, and the other thing is that they can tell us absolute location. Remember, absolute location is going to be exact pinpoint. So it'll be that longitude and latitude or an exact address, whereas relative location would be in, relative to something else. 3 blocks, south of a certain street, south of the border, north of whatever. So relative location will be not using those measurements. So real quick, we'll just kind of look at the geographic grid here. We can see we have the prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude. We have the equator running at 0 degrees latitude. And some important kind of meridians and parallels to know. The prime meridian, you can remember that it passes through Greenwich, England. So that's kind of how you can remember where that one is. And it's, also you'll see that Mercator projection. See, it's a square, so it's Mercator, is going to be depicting some standard time zones. And then another, that's an important function of the prime meridian is being a part of that as well. So looking at map scale, you're going to have large and small scale maps. So a large scale map has a small denominator and shows more detail. So it's going to be like, 1 to 10, 1 to 100. A small scale map is the opposite. Think a world map, like a globe, less detail, large denominator. So it's way zoomed out. So this would be a small scale map. And a good way to remember it is that this isn't grammatically correct, but there's too small of room to fit detail. Whereas large scale map, there's a large amount of room for details. So that's a kind of a little trick to help you remember. And then we can jump kind of into our different regions. And we have formal, functional, and vernacular as sort of our main types. So formal, is going to be like a state would be a good example. Functional, it's like going to be something, a node of influence, like a train station or a college campus, something like that, that influences a radius outside of it. So I have more detail on these slides. So vernacular region, on the other hand, is more of like a cultural identity. So the South in the US is a good example of this. And you can see each of these like colors, shades is the number of definitions for a certain area. And so because these are cultural concepts, they're subjective. So just think vernacular is like a cultural region, and it's very subjective. And speaking of scale, we also want to apply this to our analysis of concepts. So we'll think about local scale versus global scale in a lot of these different concepts. And so globalization is a process that involves the entire world, and it makes places homogeneous. You might also call those uniform landscapes, such as golf courses. You'll see McDonald's anywhere you go. So globalization of the economy, is part of that. McDonald's, globalization of culture, like with jeans, you'll see these things everywhere. They're globalized. And so with globalization and technology comes space-time compression, and it basically has shrunk the world. So an example would be, way back in, before there was really any modern technology, I might send, a letter to somebody, and it has to go on a ship and it doesn't get to them for months. Whereas now I can send a quick little email and they get it right away. And then as far as like going on a trip specifically, it's pretty far if you're going to go by boat, from like Europe to the US or something like that. It's going to take a lot of time. It makes the world feel really big. But if you are in a high-powered jet in the modern era and you get there quick, it feels like time and space has been compressed. It feels smaller. So that's kind of what that's all about. Sorry for that loud clap. That was unnecessary. And then just the idea that interaction is faster today. And so that can affect how things spread around the world, or this concept of diffusion, the way that something spreads. So we might have a cultural hearth where an idea or innovation originates. This is kind of an interesting map because it's early cultural hearths. And we have, you can kind of see these areas in orange here, where these original areas may have been, and then this kind of like sphere of interaction around that. And you can imagine how this might look different if it was like globalized and they had all the technology. It might be more of a like hierarchical type diffusion. So let's break down these types of diffusion that I'm saying a little bit more. So there's two main categories in AP Human Geography: relocation diffusion and expansion diffusion. There's one relocation diffusion, just one type, and it's moving. You move, you take your culture with you one place to another. So, maybe like the English colonists coming to the Americas, that was a way that their culture was relocation diffusion. They brought it with them and planted it down in a new spot. Expansion diffusion actually has three subtypes, and information about an innovation may spread through a society like a snowball. If you think about a snowball going down the hill and getting bigger and bigger. So there's three different types. We have contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus. Contagious diffusion, think about, like a contagious disease. It's like person to person, uniformly kind of expanding out to individuals and areas from a source region. Hierarchical diffusion is quite different. So in this case, an idea is going to go from like a node to another node, and that can be a person, usually people of authority, power, high, like the socially elite. So it could be, so you can see here, if this was like contagious diffusion, this should also hit this area here. So let's say that there's like this huge new fashion trend in New York. And instead of like spreading right to all of the little like cities next to it, maybe this is Canada here. but it doesn't go to Canada. It goes to like Milan in Italy, and it goes over to London, but it skips, Canada, because maybe that's not a huge fashion hub of the world. So it kind of like leapfrogs. You'll see the example of rap music as reverse hierarchical diffusion, just because it originated from urban centers and not the socially elite. So same concept in the pattern, but just opposite as far as like where it came from. Stimulus diffusion is that third type. And it's really like a fundamental idea, not the trait itself, stimulates imitative behavior. So a good example would be Siberians seeing domesticated cattle and then domesticating reindeer. Also, Apple computers basically take, this idea of pointing a mouse and, as opposed to having to like type in code, that stimulates innovation.